invasion of Ukraine by Russia and more sanctions imposed on it by the EU, NATO, and the US, along with the new pandemic-related shutdowns in China, are the latest events to rock global supply chains. But combined with the China-US trade war, and well, it's quite certain to accelerate the movement by Western countries to reduce their dependence on China for supplies and completely obliterate any dependence on Russia for transportation of raw materials and energy. With us today is Klas, Supply Chain Finance Manager at Unilever, to give us a better understanding on how all this will affect not only the prices in your local grocery stores, but also what FP&A specialists forecast for this ongoing crisis. So, Brian, chain professionals are constantly battling changes in supply and demand, requiring continuous adjustments to production schedules, logistics. When these planning needs are in constant change, it can be difficult, to say the least. Imagining how the finance and operation departments could be integrated, or other areas of the business for that matter. How can organizations close the gap between finance and operations?
Good question, because a lot of the times you find operations and finance on opposite sides of the table, particularly in a time like this. So in my past practices, one of the first things you really want to establish as a company, and from a finance perspective and a planning perspective together, is a good sales and operating plan process to make sure you have a good balance of perspectives that's going on in the business. Sales is always going to tell you they can sell everything. Supply chain and manufacturing is always only going to tell you what they can supply. So you balance your demand and your supply call with that finance acumen, that finance balance in the middle. And that's one of the ways companies can really get together and understand what's coming down the pike, what the possibilities are, and what the restrictions are. I've also found that making realistic assessments, again, taking that optimism from sales with a pessimism that finance is so well known for in a lot of industries, and balancing those two out. And I think a good way to get that to work well is to kind of cross-pollinate those functional areas. So have supply chain people work in finance, take a rotation in a finance role.
This ongoing crisis in Eastern Europe, and let's not forget that pandemic, that's kind of still hanging in there, will surely lead to more localized or regional sourcing strategies. Won't this hurt consumer goods companies? I wonder, as an FP&A professional, how do you plan on dealing with this threat?
Companies are actually taking a real reverse approach to what they've been doing for the last 5, 10, even 15 years of offshoring, trying to find that low-cost provider far away, and then bringing stuff back onshore. So in the United States, for instance, we'll be, instead of manufacturing things in the Far East where it's less expensive, or Eastern Europe where it's less expensive per hour, we'll reshore it back to the US to make it, to assemble it, to source it if it's possible. While I still have my factory far, far away, or my sourcing unit far, far away that I either can't use, or I can't get to, or I can't get from. And now I'm building up sourcing units, logistics networks here locally. Now I have 2 that I have to pay for. As opposed to just one efficient one, I have now 2 less efficient ones. And that's really what's driving beyond cost. And then, of course, that has to get passed on to the consumer some way, or comes out of the shareholder's pocket.
If China decides to back Russia in the Ukraine conflict, it would only fuel that movement. Things are bound to change, not only politically, if such a thing happens, but also affect the entire global economy.
In a trade war like that, it's unfortunate because the politics of it all get in the way of what I would consider a laissez-faire free market economy, which is how it should work. And that's always the risk. China's always been that lowest cost provider for these certain goods. Now, luckily Unilever does a lot of local manufacturing, but a lot of our sourcing materials, particularly like plastic bottles and cardboard boxes, just as an example, they come from the Far East, they come from China. So that's a disruption. So then it's how do you resource those things? How do you reprice and recost those things in a way that allows you to make money? Dealing with the bottoms up pricing from finance, so from the FP&A and the finance side, cost plus pricing, and then marketing kind of like demand down pricing, and trying to triangulate those two in the middle to a place where you can still sell and still make money.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine plunged the energy sector into a state of almost a deadly crisis. Europe, which ordinarily sources almost 40% of its gas from Russia, is particularly vulnerable, and we only see prices going up everywhere. Russia and Ukraine, when combined, account for 29%, 30% of the world's wheat market. As you probably know, this will surely cause shortages and push up global prices of wheat and corn-based food products, like bread or pasta and, well, your children's morning cereal. But Russia and Ukraine also account for 17% of the world's corn market, which is a key component in animal feed. So the world is not about to see higher price tag on their scones or bread or their favorite pasta in their nearby restaurant, but also on chicken and pork and their midnight omelet binge. How can you plan dealing with this?
It's not just the oil or the gas that impacts the fueling up at the gas pump, right? So taking my car to the gas station, I have to move stuff across the country, across the oceans, all these things. So, for example, Connecticut started a fuel tax holiday, right? So that they roll back their gas tax. And that's, I think, what companies have to do too. We don't tax consumers per se, but we do charge them for things like marketing and promotional materials. It's all about what's in the P&L, right? You start with how much you sell, how much does it cost you to make it, and then what's left is the money you get to spend on cool things like advertising and promotion and packaging and innovation. It's not just the wheat on my bread, it's the wheat that feeds the cow that feeds my pastrami that I put on the bread, right? It's the same thing for companies, right? It's the fuel, it's the surcharges, it's the supply chain costs that drive my need to make choices, and then those choices drive other choices.
Do you have any tips for CFOs and FP&A leaders, not only for long-term, but maybe also for the short-term solutions, preventing them from sudden collapse or loss in revenues?
One of the things that we've also looked at is reconfiguring what we're trying to sell, re-promoting. Like if I have excess inventory of X, and maybe I stop making A for a while and start to push X because I have it already, right? So really thinking about what's my stock situation at hand already. And really just focus in on, we're just going to make what sells really well. So for Unilever, that would be like, let's just focus on white bar Dove soap. Right? No matter what happens, we know we can sell that. Let's not make the purple bar, right? The purple bar is for like some weird skin type or something like that, right? I know when I walk to the grocery store, my wife and I go grocery shopping, and there's signs everywhere. This is due to the supply chain issues, right? Due to whatever. You might not see what you want in stock, right? And it's not my favorite product might not be there, but at least they have the base.
Well, let's hope we won't get to that and see better days ahead of us. Brian Klas, Supply Chain Finance Manager at Unilever. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. Anytime. Really great conversation. I enjoyed it very much.